institution, $12 trillion, which is the stimulus package is only a small part of that. And this has been used to bail out the banks, while not very little is being done for the people at the bottom, where the real problem lies. As Grace says, we don't really need to have a recovery of this kind of system. What we need to do is address the conditions of the people at the bottom of the society. And of course, in order for that to happen, people have to rise up and demand it, and it won't happen from above.
Well, but precisely this latter point that you raised, no one denies, I think, that the income disparities have grown dramatically over the last few decades, both within the United States and the rest of the world. But at the same time, with the exception perhaps of Latin America, the level of popular resistance, organized resistance, demanding change appears not to have responded. Why is, given this bleak picture in terms of the growing wealth gap, do you see the popular movements being so weak?
Well, if you look back in history, you look back to 1929, they had great disparity in income and wealth, and the population was not involved in a revolt at that time. There weren't massive strikes. The Great Depression hit, and it hit in 1929, and what we call the Great Revolt from Below in 1934 basically occurred 5 years afterwards. The big strike waves, the growth of the CIO, there was an enormous lag, and if you look at it, in terms of unemployment peaked in 1933 at 25%, and it was only after the recovery, so-called, started, the slow recovery, that people started to organize and struggle. There's a period of learning, there's organizing going on that we're not even aware of. I think that things will happen, but people have to understand that the recovery is not going to improve their lives that much, that this is a continuing problem.
I have difficulties with what John is saying, that we're meeting for the first time today. I think to go back to the 30s and expect comparable uprisings or demonstrations or protests is a mistake. I think in the 30s, our production machinery was still intact. I think that the population was very different. It was recently come from the country. It was not an urbanized population. I think that I know the United States was not yet a superpower, let alone a waning superpower. The World War II was still ahead of us, was the means by which Roosevelt tried to solve the Depression and bring back full employment. And to think that that we can expect that sort of thing today, I think is a historical mistake. So
well, maybe not exactly the same, but the point is that people respond. It takes time before you see the resistance.
You know, Michael Moore's film has just come out, Capitalism, A Love Story. He was on Jay Leno's NBC show on Tuesday promoting the new film. And I wanted to play an excerpt of what he's saying, Grace Lee Boggs, about capitalism and how you feel about that.
You say capitalism is evil. And I think greed is evil, but I think capitalism is okay as long as moderation in all things.
Yeah, capitalism, well, capitalism is actually legalized greed. There's nothing wrong with people earning money, doing well, starting a business, selling shoes. That's not what I'm talking about here. We're at a point now, Jay, in this country where the richest 1%, the very top 1%, have more financial wealth than the bottom 95% combined.
Really? Wow.
That's insane. We live in a democracy. We're supposed to have like fairness and equality, and you know, when you have a pie on the table, you know, something you and I know something about.
Right, we both had pie on the table, yeah.
But when we have a pie on the table, there's 10 slices, and one guy at the table says, 9 of those slices are mine. Right. And the other 9 of you can fight over the last slice. I mean, that's essentially the kind of economy we have now.
Now, is reform possible? Is reform possible?
Well, I don't, you know, 100 years ago, when there was child labor, they said, you know, can we reform child labor? Can we just regulate it? Like, if the factories were safer and the kids go to school, we could still have 12-year-olds working in the factory, right?
Right.
No,
Right.
not right.
Right.
It's wrong. Some things are just wrong, and this capitalist economic system that we have, it might have been right at one point. It's not right now, and I don't think we're ever going to put the genie back in the bottle. So we need to come up with something new to replace it. And I'm not talking about, this is a debate between capitalism versus socialism.
Right.
I'm actually suggesting go back to our roots of this country, democracy. What if we had an economy that you and I had a say in? Right now, we all don't have much of a say in this economy. What if we applied our democratic principles and said, we the people have a right to determine how this economy is run? I think we'd be in much better shape than what we're going through right now.
Well, Grace Lee Boggs, if you were sitting right there next to Michael Moore on Jay Leno's show, and he said, what if we applied democratic principles to the economy to determine how it should be, what would be your answer?
Well, I would say that we've got to redefine democracy, that we have been stuck in concepts of representative democracy, that we believe that it's getting other people to do things for us that we progress. And I think that we've reached the point now where we're stuck with a whole lot of concepts. So that when Michael Moore speaks about the number of people who make all this money and the number of people who don't, it sounds as if we're struggling for equality with them. Who wants to be equal to these guys? I think we have to be thinking much more profoundly. Actually, to go back to what Marx said in the Communist Manifesto over 100 years ago, when in talking about the constant revolutions in technology, he ended that paragraph by saying, all that is sacred is profaned, all that is solid melts into air, and men and women are forced to face with sober senses our conditions of life and our relations with our kind. We're at that sort of turning point in human history. And I think that talking about recovery, talking about democracy, we too easily get sucked into old notions of what we want. So we're expecting protests. I'm not expecting someone to protest. I don't mind protests, and I encourage them at times. But what happened in 2001 in Porto Alegre, Brazil, when people gathered to say another world is necessary, another world is possible, and another world is happening. I think that that's what's happening in Detroit in particular. People are beginning to say the only way to survive is by taking care of one another, by recreating our relationships to one another, that we have created a society over the last period in particular where each of us is pursuing self-interest. We have devolved as human beings. And that's why I think the monthly review is so important, because in its first issue, it published an article by Albert Einstein on socialism. And Einstein put forward a concept of socialism which was much closer to the advocacy of a radical revolution of values of Martin Luther King in 1967 than to Marx's ideas of socialism in terms of economic growth in the 19th century. And I think to know that we're in another century, actually 2 centuries from Marx.
We have to leave it there. Grace Lee Boggs, thanks so much for being with us, and John Bellamy Foster of the Monthly Review. That does it for the broadcast. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.